All right, I have a call that I really want you to take. I'm mostly just gonna sit
Uh-oh.
and listen. We're gonna talk to Michael. Hi, Michael. You
Hello.
are on SkepTalk on the line. What would you like to talk about
Hello.
today with Paul?
Well,
High
yeah, this
school.
is I was gonna say this is for Paul. Thanks for taking my
Yeah.
call. I am been doing a lot of research on the historical Peter. Not the character from the Bible, but what we know about him, as a person. And Paul seems like he would know a lot about that. So I'm sort of wondering, where do we draw the line between fact and the fiction, and where does this mythology of him as like a church father, the stuff that he was saying, what do we know about what's true about that, and what kind of got inflated over time? I didn't know if Paul could maybe shed some light on that for me
So
or direct me
sadly,
in the right direction.
my dog is going bananas, and so I missed the noun. I don't know who we're talking about.
Oh, Peter.
Peter. Perfect.
Yeah,
I've literally been working on Peter this week. So perfect. What
excellent.
sorry. So the question is what do we think we know about Peter?
Yeah, historically, like I know what the Bible says about him, but
Right.
what do we know about him as a human?
So do you accept that the letters of Paul are likely written by Paul? The seven undisputed ones?
I I understand that many scholars believe that, and I know that you believe that. So then I will say I believe that because you know more than I do.
Sorry,
I'm gonna go deal with
I
the
got a
dog.
cup.
One sec. My kid just came home and our dog is having a time. Paul, you keep talking. You might see me in the background in a sec.
Okay. So if you believe the letters of Paul, which I tend to, but and this is your mileage may vary, that Paul definitely mentions Peter several times in First Corinthians and also several times in Galatians. In fact, in Galatians, he says that he met Peter. And so that's a pretty bold claim. If you think that there was a historical Paul, and it's weird to maybe not think there was a historical Paul, or at least someone who wrote those books. So he could have been making that up entirely, but his ministry would have been better if Peter hadn't existed. So I feel like that's at least we can identify that at some point those people met each other. Your mileage may vary, but I think that that's relatively reliable. If we move from there outside the Bible, we have First Clement, and First Clement was a church father who wrote around 95 ish AD, and he was definitely, if you can trust Catholic history at all, there was a Pope, First Clement, and First Clement claimed to have had firsthand knowledge that Peter existed. Now, all that he said was that Peter met an untimely end, or something to that effect. That's not the exact words. We don't know that it was martyrdom. We don't know anything more about it, but we have Clement acknowledging him, and then we have one more source. Hmm. Before I get to that, does that ring true to you? Do you care about either of those sources at all?
I think so. My sort of angle of entry into this, if you will, is historical archaeological research of under St. Peter's Basilica. The necropolis,
Hmm.
and what they think was Peter's tomb. And I've read, I think, everything that exists in the English language on that. And very, very rare in archaeology that there's something that's that old with basically a unbroken chain of custody. That site was protected almost immediately and remained protected the entire
Well,
time.
it wasn't. It wasn't right because if Peter died indeed in 64 80 ish, those venerated sites didn't really start happening until third century. So they can say that there was an unbroken chain, but I tend to be incredibly skeptical because we don't even have great stories about exactly how Peter died, except other than the general conceit that it was Nero. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that that's Peter's remains, but I think there's good evidence that the people in the second century absolutely did believe that Peter was buried there, and they treated it as such.
yes, but what does that tell us? Really, it tells us what they believed, right?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where I'm, trying to figure out where the line is, if you'll pardon the pun. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
like, where was 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 the real historical Peter going around saying, "Hey, Jesus is my homeboy and you should hear about him, or is that something that was projected on him later? This whole church father thing, like I'm trying to sort of demystify some of that, I guess.
Okay. Um, I'm just going to rattle off a couple of my concern is more my first concern is can we actually verify that there was a Peter who started Christianity? So the ones
Hmm.
I would add to my list there, Tertullian is our major secular source who specifies that Peter was killed under Nero. That's mainly the source that we have for that. And then we have Irenaeus and Eusebius are both the other church fathers who kind of like their writings tend to be, for me, at least lend to the historicity that Peter was a person.
Hmm.
But none of them for me, and that's part of my, can tell us what Peter, no one gives us a quote like Peter said blah blah blah, right? Like there's none of them say anything. The first we get of that is the Gospels. For anyone even attempts to put a phrase into Peter's mouth. So I'm kind of at the point in my research where I'm kind of like, well, Peter was definitely a guy and was definitely really involved with Christianity starting, but we just cannot, with any confidence, say anything that he did or said
Hmm.
based
Okay.
on my research. Does that ring with what you have found?
Yeah, yeah, it really does. And I guess, you know, I mean, there may be no way to know any of this, but a lot of stuff is attributed to him. But I'm wondering, how much of that was projected on him by later generations, and how much was him claiming things at the time. The whole story about him leaving and then seeing the vision and coming back and getting crucified, like all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's impossible to know, but the evidence sure seems like that all those reports are much later and definitely
Right,
theologically driven as opposed to historically driven, right? So
right.
like Mark, I don't care if you think the genre of Mark is biography-ish. The reason that book exists, it tells us that it wants you to believe and be saved, right? Like it's a
Hmm.
tract. It's
Right,
not intended to be dispassionate. Oh well, I'm just going to record all the things that Jesus had for lunch because for posterity that might be cool. It's definitely like a theological treatise, right? So I'm with you. And as Bert Ehrman says, there was a veritable cottage industry, right, of people writing things in Peter's name. There was the Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of Peter, the Acts of Peter. There were First and Second Peter, which were definitely not written by Peter because they know things. They know a lot of things about what happened in the church after Peter died, right? So it's just, well,
right,
no, he
right,
didn't
right,
write them. So
right.
but he was definitely, I feel like we have enough data points to say he was a central figure because that's who everyone wanted to hitch their wagon to when there was disputes about Mark, right? The Gospel of Mark. Papias decided, well, I'm hitching that to, okay, it wasn't Peter because he was dead when it was written, but it'll be Mark, who supposedly was a friend of Peter's, right? So he was definitely, he was a linchpin. As much as we want to say that Paul, a lot of people want to say that Paul started Christianity. If Peter hadn't existed before that, if there hadn't been someone making that central hub before that, Paul couldn't convert to it. So, that's is why for me and my hypothesis, those are the 1-2 punch. I was actually just reading First Clement again yesterday, the letter of First Clement, and in that I actually tweeted about it. The only two apostles he lists are Peter and Paul, right? Like he says, oh, there's lots of heroes of our faith, but the only ones those are the two that the early church was definitely anchoring themselves to. And again, with all like where were all the martyrs' bones, and does the Catholic Church have them? Those are 4th century, 5th century, way later. So I don't know why anyone puts any stock in that. Anyway, I feel like I've been rambling and not really responding to questions. So did you have more question, or did you just want me to
No, no,
ramble about a topic that I like?
no, that's helpful because it's I was raised Catholic and I deconverted pretty early in my teens, and I'm in my late 30s now. So I'm more interested in the, like I said, the archaeological aspect and the what we do know historically. So I'm currently trying to figure out how much of this was just tradition or mythology or whatever, and how much of this is actually based on facts. So that's sort of what I'm navigating right now.
Yeah,
So I,
there's
I
no,
definitely
as far
appreciate
as I can tell,
your view.
there's not a, as far as my research tells me, there's not a lick of archaeology. Like just no, archaeology is very rare for a person who didn't have coins or steelies minted for them. Like we don't even have archaeology for Jesus really, right? So I
Sure.
do recommend. So Bart Ehrman wrote a book, one of his first books, and very few people have read it. It's called Peter, Paul, and Mary, and it's a third of each book. The third of the book is about just what evidence do we have for the existence of each of those people. I think you can get an ebook version, so it's a good one that kind of isn't caught up in the nostalgia of the tradition about it. I actually think he grants a little bit more than I would, but it definitely is going through the evidence in a way that is dispassionate from tradition or feelings or needing it to be true. So yeah, as far as this, there's not that many secular books about Peter. That's probably the only one I know of.
Well, that's very helpful. Definitely appreciate your time. Thank you.
No worries.
Cool. I'm
All
glad
right.
I could be
Have
here
a great
to
night,
get
everyone.
the dog out of
Yes.
the way.
Thank you for wrangling the dog.
but,
Yeah.
but here she is. She's
I know
literally
my
on my
role in
face.
this
There he is. All right.
conversation. Thank you, Michael. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
No problem. Ah, I knew exactly what my role was going to be there.
Mm,
Get the dog out of the way. I'm excited. All right. Do you have one more call on you? One more,
I sure do.
and then we'll read super chats. I think people sent
Woo.
super chats. I hope so.
If not, we'll be done
It's like
sooner.
the weirdest thing because I feel like asking for super chats is like, like it makes me feel weird. But then if people don't send them, then I compare myself to the other people and I'm like, oh man,
Mm.
people don't like me as much. But that's I have a weird brain that does weird stuff. We don't need to talk about it anymore. We're gonna take one last call. We're gonna talk to Matthew. And hi,
Hello.
Matthew. You are on the
Hi, how are
line.
y'all
What would you
doing?
like to talk about? I'm spectacular. Excited to talk to
You
you.
probably
What would
don't.
you like to talk about today?
Oh, it's very rainy out here, so I thought I'd give you guys a
Uh-oh.
call. It's beautiful outside, so that's the
We're
question.
glad you
I was
chose to hang with us.
you probably don't remember me, Paul. I called about 2 weeks ago about the Talmud Jesus. Remember that? I called you about that.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, I had another question for you guys. I was watching one of your older videos. I think it's one of your most popular videos where you talk about are there any authentic secular writings, and you interjected
Yes.
and said something,
Mhm.
and you said something like, I want to know if there are any secular writings about Jesus' miracles, and I was wondering if you ever followed up on that, on if there are any secular writings about the miracles of Jesus. You ever
So
followed up on that?
this feels like, just more continuance. It's history with a non-historian. Let me just put that out there. I
Yeah.
am not a historian, but I am very interested in this topic. So what I can tell you is that the big thing that people would point to would be the Josephus passage, the Flavonium that most people in the Antiquities of the Jews that most people think is either whole cloth inserted by the Christians or highly embellished. There was some kind of core kernel of a mention, and then it was highly embellished. That definitely called Jesus a miracle. That's the big one, right? The secular one, because it kind of calls Jesus a miracle worker. Now, beyond that one, even most Christians will concede that the Jewish Josephus probably didn't write that, but he did write about a lot of other first century prophets, right? Apocalyptic prophets. And when he described those, like Honi the circle drawer and the Egyptian, and trying to think of some of the other names, there's a whole litany of them that were, basically parodied in Life of Brian, for example. He would talk about the fact that people would believe that they worked miracles. And so you can find secular writings, I believe Suetonius, I believe, why am I blanking on the guy who wrote the comedies, the satires? You can find a lot of
Lucian.
references to Lucian, thank you. So there's it's just the standard ones of those that are basically affirming that people believed he was a miracle worker. I've never found a secular source that affirmed that the writer believed that Jesus was a miracle worker. It's just affirming that that's his reputation. So, I mean, I guess that was short answer, no. Long answer, no.
But I appreciate appreciate it. So do you think all of Josephus is a forgery? Just the yes or no answer? Because, at first it's like, well, it's only a partial forgery, but the more I look at it, it's like, I think hearing David Fitzgerald speak about it, it's like, I don't think Josephus wrote that paragraph at all. What do you think?
So I agree with you, and I'm willing to entertain the notion that it grew over time, like that there was an insertion and then more insertion and more insertion, maybe, but the evidence for me, and I wouldn't die on this hill, but if you pluck that thing out, if you pluck that whole paragraph out, what Josephus wrote flows very well, and you would never think that it missed a beat, right? It's kind of like part of the same way they discovered that, like, the story of the woman caught in adultery. If you pluck that out of John, the story actually flows better. It's not disrupted anymore. Like John 7 flows into John 9. I think that's roughly where it is. Really well. So I think that's the best argument that that Josephus literally said nothing. But then you have to deal with the fact that at least Josephus does authentically talk about James, the brother of Jesus, right? And the James that we know was part of the church. So you don't get to say that Josephus said nothing about him. I just think that section that you're talking about, the Flavonium, I'm 51% that he didn't say a single word there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It's funny how you mentioned you were reading Clement last night. Great minds think alike. I swear to God, I was actually reading Clement last night as well.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, Clement.
Do you think? No. I'm going to ask you this. Do you think
I'm gonna get comfortable.
Do you think that Clement is saying? So a friend of ours, Chrissy Hansen, has an article that is upcoming for publication, so I can't share too much about it, but it had me reading Clement again. There is an idea out there, because that whole section was about jealousy, right? He was listing off all the people in the Old Testament who are jealous in chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, he's like, and John, the reason why Peter and Paul are dead is because everyone was jealous of them. If you read it in that light, and then it's like, did the Christians kill them? Because the whole point of Clement's passage is all these Old Testament people died because jealous people murdered them, and then he puts Peter and Paul in the same boat. And I'd never read it that way before, and so now I'm in this weird conspiracy. Do you think there's anything to it, having read it last night?
Well, what stood out is that he never mentioned any of Jesus's miracles in his letter. He does.
That is correct. That's correct. Although that's a bit of an argument from silence, though. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I know Richard Carrier thinks that Clement does not place Jesus on earth, and it's like, I'm not. And well, because we only know like 5 facts from Clement. The gospel was given to the apostles by Jesus himself. The gospel was the main teaching. Jesus' resurrection provided assurance of the truthfulness of his teachings. With Scripture, the apostles spread the gospel, and wherever the gospel was preached, local congregations were started, leaders were chosen to minister to the believers. But none of that tells anything historical about Jesus. Is that what you got from it as well?
I'm with you, and that's why I think it tells us nothing about what any Christians claim to have said. There's no resurrection. You're absolutely like. I care mostly if does it refer to the resurrection, but go ahead. I'm cutting you off.
Oh no, it's okay. And very interestingly, if you read if you read Dr. Richard Carrier's book, he actually dates Clement to the 60s. And he has. Oh. I'm not sure if you read that part in his book or not, but have you read that or no? In his book,
I have, but I read that book. I read about 7 years ago, and I was leaning mythicist at the time, so I actually do need to give it a fresh read now that I've immersed myself on the other side a little more.
Yeah, he did Clement to the 60s. So some Christians might be like, oh, see, it's the 60s, but it's like, so some Christians might be like, oh, see, it's the 60s. That's more proof. It's like. But like I just said, if you read it, he doesn't really place Jesus.
Oh yeah, no, it affirms nothing other than, I think, the historicity that Peter and Paul were real humans.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. What about?
All right.
I was wondering if you caught the section on Phlegon. Some people say, "Oh, well, Origin quotes Phlegon as saying, quote, not only Phlegon not only ascribed to Jesus uh, uh, knowledge of." Basically, he's saying, "Oh shit! Oh, sorry, I thought I hung up." Sorry.
Oh, you're there.
Basically,
You
he's saying
good?
that. Basically, he's saying Jesus predicted the future and all that stuff came true, and I was like, that doesn't really sound secular. You know what I mean? I mean, we
Mm.
we don't know basically a
Well,
whole lot of about
well,
Phlegon.
but Origin wasn't secular.
Oh, of course.
Or you're saying Phlegon was secular.
Well, some people
So
claim
you've
that
now
Phlegon was secular.
okay, you've entered into a little corner that I'm not comfortable giving commentary on because that particular passage
Oh, that's
is not ringing a bell to me. So
that's okay. What about like
that's
Justin?
okay. I'm new to all this. I up until a few years ago, just the Bible was good enough. It was in the Bible. That's all you needed to know. The church father stuff. That's for Catholics.
What about? Do you think? And a lot of people think that Justin Martyr is a good source for a secular source for Jesus' miracles. I was like, how can people possibly think that? That's like
Yeah, that's
120 years later.
that also is a little bit like saying that like that the Pope is a good source for a secular source. It's just Justin Martyr is not
Yeah,
a secular source. So yeah.
exactly. People like Quadrus and Barnabas and all that stuff, Phlegon, they think they're secular sources. But I looked at it, which is getting back to my original question. I was like, well, just those few ones that I mentioned, those are the only ones that they list as like, secular, right? Extra biblical sources for miracles, and I'm like, no, that's it doesn't. It's not adding up. not
So
not credible.
do you think based on this conversation I need to update that video, or is that video still comprehensive enough to cover what we're
Oh,
talking about?
I thought it was just a little a cool little side note. How you said that you would be more interested in the are
Yeah.
there secular writings about the miracles, and I was like, I wonder if you could ever do a video on that. But yeah, but
Well, I
I
could
mean,
because the one you're talking about was literally amongst. It was in the first 6 months of my channel existing, so
yeah,
perhaps freshers might be good.
Justin Martyr. One last thing, Justin Martyr wrote something like, "Oh, in the Acts of Pontius Pilate, he recorded Jesus'
Mm,
miracles," and I'm
mhm.
like, well, we don't. If 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 Pilate had a report, it doesn't exist anymore.
No,
You know
but
what I
you know what
mean?
the acts
So
of
it's like,
but you've seen the Acts of Pilate, right? Like the Acts of Pilate is
oh yeah,
literally just an
that's
anti-Semitic pamphlet. It's literally just you should hate those people because they killed Jesus.
well, that's
Yeah.
the thing. Some
So
people think, oh well, some people might think, oh, Justin's referring to Pilate's actual report, which is no longer around, and I'm like,
yeah, right.
that's kind of a.
Well, and it
So
could be a Clone Wars situation where he mentioned it and therefore and it didn't exist, so people started writing some so that to make it exist, right? Like that's
yeah,
definitely a
exactly.
theory out there too. So yeah, if
So like,
that book is lost, so I'll plug one in and sell it. And anyway, thank you, Matthew.